Hello and welcome to the first of hopefully many episodes of what has been titled the TRB In-Lap podcast. It's me, Tim, your host, your friend from Instagram, that person who spends far too much time frantically. There we go. That's the word I was trying to find. Fantastic start to a podcast there, Tim. Great job. Really done an excellent job. Anyway, yes, I'm here. I am joined by my good friend, colleague, Michael Haffenden, who will be dissecting the Rolex 24 of 2021, which happened over the weekend just gone. It is Monday afternoon. It's a bit of a horrible day here in the UK. Nothing, not even a scratch on the sunny and beautiful looking evening and day we had in Daytona for a mega start to the 2021 IMSA season. So, Michael, how are you doing and how are you feeling after, well, a second 24-hour weekend on the bounce for you and me?
Yeah, it's been a lot of sleep deprivation after the last couple of weeks, isn't it, really? It was a brilliant race. I'm really excited to chat about it. We always say that the Rolex 24 delivers, and I think this year was one of the best of the past few seasons. So, yeah, let's get straight into it.
And well, I suppose the format of today's show is we're going to go class by class. We're going to dissect what happened. Like I said, we're going to have a look at some emerging storylines, not only from the race, but going forwards for the rest of the season and beyond. In the case of some exciting news we had pre-24-hour race. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, I've put these in order of, I suppose, importance. Might be a bit too heavy-handed, but okay. We'll start with the class where I think there's least to talk about, but some interesting points to raise, which is LMP3. I feel like we need some kind of jokey siren for when anyone
we're getting straight into it here, aren't we?
Yeah,
the most important class first.
LMP3. So I'll kick things off here with what I think. My general comment on the LMP3 class was I didn't feel like it added anything. Now, I think that was the general perception from a lot of people, particularly from followers on TRB. I got a lot of comments as I posted the race update saying, "Oh, something happened in LMP3," or "Oh, the gap's for 3 laps. It doesn't, what does that even mean?" It did feel like the old LMPC days, I think, is something.
I was waiting for this.
We
comment.
Decided.
I think when it got announced, me and you that was the initial worry. We sort of thought, is this going to be a prototype challenge 2.0? I don't know how many TRB listeners will, have just got into IMSA, but when the United Sports Car Championship formed, the LMPC category was one which was notorious for causing a few issues, not the like of which we did see quite a lot of in LMP3 on the weekend. Daytona is a tricky track to sort of prove a class, I think. The speed differentials can be quite strange in terms of top end speed. We also have the issue of cars being on cold tyres and generating their lap times in different ways. The LMP3s obviously don't have nearly as much mechanical grip as some of the GT classes, so they're always going to trip over each other on the infield. And we thought going into it might be a bit messy, especially with the times we saw at the Raw, where there was really not much in it between the LMP3 cars and the GTLM category. But obviously, like I say, generating that sort of time on different areas of the track is very difficult when it comes to when you're battling out in the 24-hour race. And to be fair, we didn't really see much of a battle in the LMP3 class, which the same cannot be said for GTLM.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose for me, I felt the LMP3 edition came in off the back of a difficult season. Obviously, 2020 was arguably the toughest season for race teams, in the last maybe 40 years or so. I felt the P3 edition was to maybe plug the gap left by a very noticeably small LMP2 field. And that addition would have made sense if we had 2 LMP2 cars. But I'm looking forward, like you say, it's a tricky track to, a lot of people are maybe too quick to say whether this is a worthwhile addition. But I think we'll maybe get to tracks where overtaking is slightly more difficult. I think we're blessed with the banking at Daytona where cars can pass. The P3 cars did seem to have the legs on a lot of occasions over the GTs, so they were able to make those passes cleanly. I think maybe when we get to the the Laguna Secas, these next few tracks, I suppose, in the season, we might see some more issues rear their ugly heads. But the general comment is, great to have another class, I suppose, more cars, more excitement, more spectacle. But did it really provide that? And I think it's going to be something maybe we can pass a better judgment on 3 or 4 more races down the line.
Yeah, exactly. It's something we shouldn't be too quick to jump the gun on. From a sort of nerdy perspective, it was quite cool to see LMP3 cars taking part in a major 24-hour race. I can't remember a time I've seen that. I know Thunderhill was mentioned. I know the Brit car 24 Hours of Silverstone when Nissan, the Ginetta Nissan of Chris Hoy did the race there. In recent memory, certainly, I can't remember an LMP3 car going for that long. So it did raise some sort of question marks over reliability as well, which they seem to be fairly on top of. But I do completely take your comment and agree with the LMP2 thing, because ironically, it sort of, like you said, the announcement came about LMP3 last year, and we all sort of, it was met with mixed response, of course, but a lot of us rejoiced at just saying, okay, there's going to be a few extra cars on the grid, because we'd seen depleted numbers for obvious reasons we don't need to go into here. And then we end up actually seeing one of the best, I think the best LMP2 fight, certainly in terms of entries and in terms of how close the battle was across the Rolex 24 since the introduction of DPI, I think.
Well, so let's one final point to round off LMP3, and then we'll get on to P2, because I feel like you're about to touch on a very good segue. Is that, for me, a hidden story amongst the caramelage that is the Rolex 24 was Oliver Askew, who's ex McLaren Arrow SP.com/.org racing driver in IndyCar. A fantastic young driver, in my opinion, who was unfortunate to sit out a large majority of the second half of the season, 2020 season, with a concussion, and to really be dropped quite unceremoniously by McLaren, arrowsp.com/website.com. It was quite unfair, and although semi-justified due to the injuries and maybe ongoing problems he might face, I think he really showed himself. Okay, there wasn't a big LMP3 race to watch, like you say. There were 3 lap gaps between the cars for the almost 18 hours. But he, in a first time in a prototype, first time at a 24-hour race, feel like to get a win straight off the bat in a good team at Riley Motorsports. Is this another young gun we're going to see make a successful hop from single-seater open wheel racing to a prototype career? And with LMDH, etc., the new era around the corner, is a performance like that, and hopefully a good season ahead, maybe going to put his name amongst bigger ones for a bigger prototype drive. So let's go on to slightly bigger prototype cars then. So LMP2.
Very good. Very good segue.
Do you like that one?
Yeah, enjoyed that.
First podcast, and already got some good transitions going on. So like you say, a good race really in P2. Maybe not the size of the race we've seen at Le Mans, where 4 or 5 cars seem to be in the fight at the front. But like you say, a bigger field. This was a field twice the size that we had in 2020. And I suppose the 2020 Rolex 24 was pre-COVID. So to see this post-COVID, I know the broadcasting teams passed a quick remark on that, to have 10 cars competing. Okay, a large proportion of them are invitational, one-off, event attendees. A fantastic number nonetheless. Yeah,
definitely. It was also nice to see the variation in the class. It's something we don't often see, especially now in WEC, where LMP2 has unfortunately sort of become an Orica-only sort of class, with the other sort of chassis being petered out a little bit over the last couple of years, especially. But it was great to see, the Ligier might not have had the race that they wanted to have, and the same with the Dallara. But we did see a very strong showing. Very close to, unlike me delivering that sentence, from the Settler Dallara very early on, which I know pleased a lot of, not just us two, who quite enjoy the Dallara and that livery, but a lot of race fans said, it's great to see something other than an Orica up there and fighting. And we did see the battle rage throughout the race. It wasn't just a case of, the opening hours were good or it got a bit close in the night. We did see it go down to the wire, and it actually came down to a bit of mixed strategy between the two leaders at the end, which is always nice to see. So I really enjoyed that fight, and I think that's the first time in recent memory, certainly at the Rolex 24, where I've paid a little bit more attention to the LMP2 category since, like I said, since DPI sort of became the premier class and the DPs and P2s weren't battling out for overall honours.
I think the race really proved where LMP2 can stand in IMSA. I think there's been a lot of questions over, is it really adding anything? Is it really a strong enough field for it to prove its point amongst the bigger prototypes and a great GT field where prior to this year and indeed to 2020, we had 5 manufacturers who were playing ball in GTLM. I think it's the race. Okay, we do have to take those entry numbers with a pinch of salt. Like I say, there's going to be teams, the Team Netherlands, I think Eurasia as well, high class. There are a handful of teams who picked this race to go racing, and they're not going to do the rest of the IMSA season. So, yeah, we've got to expect the field to drop. But I think it proved that actually, well, and most importantly, like you say, the battle at the end was between two teams that are doing the full season, Era and Tower Motorsports, which is fantastic. And to see the drivers in there, I know a lot of people like Dwight Merriman and Carl Tilley, who are obviously raced at Le Mans last year and had the stories of the broken IDEX chassis being replaced or rebuilt entirely before the race. But for me to see Paul-Loup Chatin and Gabriel Aubry, two young guns again in prototype racing, going head to head for one of the biggest race wins in the world, is really starting to maybe prove that LMP2 is going to attract younger drivers to it. Right, we're on the verge of a big regulation change, but Gus Menezes racing quite successfully last year with Dragon Speed, and okay, he lost his race win at Sebring, but again, that's a big name getting involved. Gabriel Aubry with his successes with Jackie Chan, DC Racing, etc. in ELMS and at Le Mans, something to prove. And here he is racing at this big stage. And Team Netherlands car, obviously, pretty much forgotten about considering the weekend they had. But to have them coming over to Florida to play ball, I think it's quite an important narrative that is not to be not to be forgotten about.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's easy to forget some of the entries we did have, perhaps because they didn't have the most luck or the best run. Like you mentioned, the Netherlands car there got off to a fairly strong start, and we didn't really get to see the pro drivers in that car get much of a chance to fight at the front, which was a bit of a shame because I'm sure at some point they would have come good. But yeah, like you say, it's becoming, or is already, a great class, and it has had question marks over how it belongs in IMSA, but I guess the limelight's sort of being shifted onto LMP3 in that respect, certainly from the Rolex weekend. Of course, we have to, like you say, we have to take some of these entries with a pinch of salt across other classes as well as LMP2, GTLM, for instance, but definitely in LMP2, it's a very good point that the two leading cars in the class were full season entries, and that's great to see. And it was great to see the passion from Gabriel Aubry after the race, to see, his head, head in his hands kind of thing, really quite down about everything, but it shows that he gave it his all, and that's nice to see. And you don't get that from a class which you haven't driven your heart out in. You wouldn't get that if there'd been, multiple laps between the cars and not much of a battle out on track. And yes, they might not have been fighting wheel to wheel for the win, but it really was a race of strategy at the end in that class. So that was nice to see, and I think encouraging, hopefully, something that we see more of, especially in the Enduros this year, if not in some of the shorter races, the sprint races.
So I suppose a question to ask you would be, do you think that the whole invitational concept in terms of having teams enter one-off, do you think that's at a detriment to the rest of the season? Because say you're a new fan, say you're someone who's tuned in for the first time, and you see, oh, that's Guido van der Garde's car. I used to see him in Formula One, or oh, I follow him on Twitter because he posts funny stuff about someone's hairline or whatever. Do you think that's a problem then when they turn on the coverage next time and it's Sebring and there's 4 or 5 cars missing? Do you think that's an issue, or do you think that's just the nature of the race and that's just something that's always been, why change it? Because I think there is potentially something, an issue there that could arise.
Yeah, I'm going to sit on the fence a bit with this one. So I'm not going to commit to either side of the argument, really. I do see the point. Yes, it is a bit disappointing, maybe even slightly anticlimactic to start the season in this way and then have it sort of drop off in terms of entry numbers and battles we see out on track throughout the year. But like you say, that is kind of the nature of the beast. We do see a lot bigger entry numbers in LMP2 category, in GT Am, for Le Mans than we do in the full season WEC. And you could argue that's a similar sort of thing where the big events are always going to attract a bigger grid. In some senses, that's just the way it is. I do understand it's a little bit disappointing that, we have to sort of enjoy it while it lasts at the start of the season for the Enduros. And it'd be great to see some of those cars back at Sebring, of course. But yeah, that's not to say it won't be slightly disappointing when we do get to the shorter races later in the season. But, that is unfortunately part of it. I don't really see how we can get around that. If anything, it's better that it is that way round and we're seeing the bigger entries for the longer races because we get to enjoy them for more time, rather than sort of, maybe logistics being favourable to one of the shorter rounds or something like that. I don't know, sort of plucking at examples which I can't find in my brain right now, but you know what I mean. It is
exactly
one you can see both sides of. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, what do I think? Well, this is what I think. I'm going to get onto that. I know the listeners are probably fed up of hearing what I think, so they're potentially enjoying a second voice on the matter. But to me, yes, it's frustrating in the sense that then suddenly maybe you've got a rivalry that turns up on track in this first race, and we had the Settelar car doing great. Obviously, before the race, we all knew that was the last time we'd see that car, we'd see that team run an LMP2 car. We all knew that. But to see them actually doing a really good job and thinking, wow, actually, have they got a chance in IMSA competition compared to in WEC? Can they actually fight with the Dallara? It starts to open those questions. And then, okay, that's it. They're just doing that race. It's a bit anticlimactic, like you say. But I think maybe we have to think a year ahead when we think about invitational entries. And actually, okay, right, so Racing Team Netherlands came, and they didn't have a good time, point blank. Their whole week was a pain in the arse for them. Car arriving late, they missed a large proportion of first practice and practices for the Raw before. And then in the race, we have a silly incident with Fritz van Ernst, which I'm sure we'll cover in a second. But then a year ahead, they're going to go, right, unfinished business is the definition of our emotions towards the Rolex 24. Let's go back. And to back that up, we're seeing United Autosport now talking about IMSA entry next year, running a P2 car at Sebring potentially. Maybe that we need these big events at the start of the season. Works pretty well as a kind of try before you buy, to really boil down what is a fundamentally complex business system to one of the most basic fundamentals of shopping at your local corner shop or whatever. Push the button on the Action Man to make his arms spin round before you buy it, convince your parents to buy it. But I think maybe that's where it works, is that now, Robert Kubica didn't even get a chance to race in the actual Rolex 24. It's going to be gutting, especially with the fans behind him, the sponsors, Orlan, who pretty much now his second or third name. Maybe that's how it works. Maybe that's how the bigger picture of these invitational entries are, that you get a taste for it. And if it doesn't go well, and even if it does go well, you want to come back for more.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's also, there's a case for this being the first major, sorry to buy 24 hours, endurance race, which, is going to be the biggest endurance event of the season that we see. And we want it to start with a bang. Of course we do, especially in the times we and all the teams are currently sort of battling through. Um, and I think it does bode well for the future when we see an entry like this. And like you say, maybe it could work both ways, in that some teams didn't have a great time, and with the Team Netherlands car being delayed and getting there, then having a really sort of unlucky run throughout, that might then become a bit of a we tried it and it didn't work out kind of thing. Or like you say, it could become a, we really got unfinished business here, so let's come back. And if there's already talk of which there is, of new teams joining, like United Auto Sports, which is something that kind of really makes enough sense that when we heard that news, we sort of said, well, why hasn't this happened before? Because it makes complete sense for them. So yeah, future is bright. Shall we move on to another class?
Yes, we shall. Fantastic.
Where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? Higher or lower? Higher or lower?
I personally am going to go lower down the pace order, but higher in terms of excitement. And the category that keeps on giving, no matter what track we're at, is, of course, GTD. And the race at Daytona was once again a thriller. I mean, you could almost draw out a timeline on your wall and throw a dart at it, and something would have been happening at that specific minute you picked. What was your opinion of the GTD race? I know it's going to be positive, but as a whole, as another Rolex 24 with GT3 cars involved, how did you find it? What did you think?
I thought it was brilliant, to be honest. I think that was the class I enjoyed the most. Yes, the overall battle was really thrilling towards the end. But sort of throughout the 24, I think that was the strongest class in terms of drawing attention to itself. Not in a negative way either, in a very positive way. The racing was pretty clean throughout. We obviously saw some contact, which was a bit of a shame. I'm sure we'll come on to that a bit later on. But up until that point, we'd really seen some of the best battling on track. And I think maybe with the context we have with GTD Pro becoming a thing, maybe it got a bit of extra emphasis this weekend, which it should. It was a fantastic entry list and really, really great to see, the usual sort of roster of factory drivers, but also a bit of reshuffling. We've had, some of the, in terms of Aston Martin drivers being in the TF Sport and Heart of Racing cars. And we saw sort of across the class, we saw some of the Porsche factory guys like Vantor in the FAF car. That kind of thing is really nice to see, because it does sort of bolster that excitement level, in that it's not just, a class where, we'll just watch GTLM, but GTD will be quite good to watch as well. That was like, okay, this is, the level of competition has really stepped up a notch this year. And I think it bodes well for the future with GTD Pro.
I think, I suppose the point to add is, it wasn't, I suppose, those established GTD teams at the front. I mean, you could say your FAFs, your Wright Motorsports, your Paul Miller Lamborghini taking part and very much competing at the sharp end. But Winward Racing, who are debutants at the Rolex 24, the Sun Energy 1 car, which we haven't seen for a while, controversial livery is a little side note. But, those are teams that haven't competed in IMSA either before or for a while. I know Sun Energy 1 used to race, I think they raced a few years ago when I've got vague memories of seeing that car at the Lone Star Le Mans when WEC and IMSA would get together at Austin. And also Heart of Racing, they an established team in terms of the names behind it. The Heart of Racing have been around for a while, but a young team in terms of competing in this category. I think that car was probably one of my favorites to watch, because we had this story, didn't we, about how they'd set the car up for the daytime, and we spent
was fantastic.
Much of the night watching Jan Halen and Pat Long try and get past a very slippery and slidey Darren Turner. That was a brilliant little a little chapter in the race to watch, wasn't it?
That was fascinating. And I think that was, that's one of the things that endurance racing fans love. The devil's in the detail when it comes to these sort of things. And the Heart of Racing Car had a pretty strong start. And when you've got someone like Darren Turner at the wheel, you don't expect to see it going backwards, sliding around, getting overtaken. And it was sort of opening up question marks. And then when we found out, okay, they've set the car up to be running better in the day, it does make sense. I know we had this conversation at the time, but you think how much of the race is run at night. You think, okay, we want a car which really performs well at night. But in many senses, the Rolex 24 is sort of about surviving until the last 3 or 4 hours and then really giving it everything, as we've seen so often, not just overall, in many of the other categories. And I think that was something which surprised a few people, but also, you can see it makes sense. You want to have your weapons sharpest at the end kind of thing. But that was brilliant. And there was the caliber of drivers in that class and the variation of cars is really good to see, especially when we do have GTLM in the state that it's in. It was really nice to not feel like, okay, we're only watching this because the GTLM battle isn't great, because that was still a great battle, albeit with significantly less cars. But it was a really, really interesting fight to watch. And you couldn't really call the winner for a long time, especially throughout the night. We had that fantastic battle with, I think it was Charlie Eastwood in the TF Sport car, taking the lead and then having it taken away from him. And it was almost like, okay, this car looks really strong now. Oh no, suddenly it doesn't, because next lap that car's drafted past it. A Mercedes leading. Oh, but there's a Wright Motorsport Porsche in there. It was one of those fantastic things battling through traffic that you really thought, this is, I don't really know what's going to happen next. And it was a proper train at some points, wasn't it?
And it was a fantastic advert for GT3. If you were a GT3 doubter, maybe you'd heard the news about GTD Pro and I love GT cars, love GTLM, rightfully so. Oh, they're not the same as GT3 cars. Well, there in that battle you're talking about, under the cover of darkness, 5 cars? There was the 57 Winward Merc. There was the Wright Motorsport car, the Porsche. There was the Heart of Racing Aston, the TF Sport Aston. Convinced there was the AF Corsa Ferrari was getting involved.
Yeah,
5 cars, all that had quite unique strengths as well around the track. That was fascinating to watch. If you never watched a GT3 race before, which you would have had to have been hiding in a very dark corner of the forest under a very heavy rock to have not caught a GT3 race before. What a fantastic advert for it. And it was really exciting stuff. A couple of incidents actually that I want to cover. First of all, there was the slightly concerning fuel rig issue with the Turner Motorsport BMW. And that's something that we're used to seeing in Formula One prior to 2008, really, isn't it? A bit of a concerning one there, but I was actually quite fascinated with how it was handled. No major outbreak of fire. There was no, people seemed pretty calm about it. It was concerning to the extent where Bill Auberlen, Mighty Bill, who just got out of the car, was splashed in the face with race fuel. Horrible experience. I must imagine having once or twice got Head and Shoulders shampoo in my eyes, but not to compare my pain in that experience to what he
yours
felt.
is much worse, mate. Yours is much worse, don't worry.
Yeah, I'm only just getting over this morning's problems and trauma. But I was actually really impressed with how calm that was. I know it's not something that cameras are going to focus on because they don't want to show that thing on a global feed, but impressed that it just seemed to be brushed off, and the mechanics got up and were okay and checked out, and they went to the medical teams, and Bill unfortunately he had just got out of the car, so he was taking off his overalls and getting chilled out afterwards anyway, so he was able to hop in the shower and proper get that stuff off him. But I don't know. I feel like, is this something really to remark on? I thought it was quite a noticeable calm surrounding an incident that typically, 10 years ago, we would be all going, "Oh, that's horrible,"
Yeah, I do know what you mean. It was a dramatic moment, and almost in modern motorsport now, we're so used to seeing things like that never happen. Really, we're so used to seeing perfect pit stops, maybe an issue with the wheel nut or a car stalling as it tries to get away. engine overheating a little bit while it's been standing still, that sort of thing. We don't very rarely see that sort of drama on the pit lane. And it did seem to be, like you said, something which at first we were like, oh my goodness, that was terrible. Really, the only sort of majorly concerning bit was is Bill okay? Because he seemed to be completely showered in race fuel. And also, of course, in IMSA, they have the car's engine running still. So it could have been a huge fire. We could have had a major issue on pit lane there. Thankfully, we didn't. And the team seems to very commendably just sort of get into battle stations and deal with it as if it had been something they'd been practicing. Maybe they've gone into sort of survival mode and gone, right, what can I do to help out here, rather than really thinking about what they're doing. But no, that was very well handled. And I thought fair play to the Turner Motorsport Twitter admin as well, who I know was having a fair share of banter with GRT Grasser throughout the race. But he sort of said, the team holds its hands up as an issue on our end, and Bill's okay, which is everything that the fans need to know, why it happened and whether everyone's okay, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was nice to see.
I suppose then moving on to another incident that a lot of people might have forgotten about because it didn't have a major impact on the result of the race, was the collision between the Team MGMT GMT +1 time zone Porsche and the TF Sport Aston Martin with Ben Keating on board. Now, first of all, let's start this off. Ben Keating, I mean, what a marathon man he is. He had done, when the race had run to 9 hours worth of racing, I think he had done maybe 7 hours in 2 different cars through being able to split it up. Some stat I saw anyway like that flying around on Twitter. How impressive it is to see him. It's not like he's separating it between 2 cars in the same class. Back in the day, we used to have Scott Sharp and was it Guy Cosmo used to split time between 2 of the ESM cars. There was some swappage back in ALMS days.
Certainly in recent years, it's been Keating who's been the standout, the go-to guy for that kind of thing, and a fantastic first stint in LMP2 as well. I don't think it was last year, potentially the year before, where he did exactly the same thing, just led from the start. Very, very cool, calm, collected first stint, especially in the conditions we saw at the start of the race, which were less than ideal. Obviously, having an incident before the green flag, which I'm sure we'll go on to as well. That's already becoming a TRB in lap podcast cliche, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, we did see him get a fantastic start to the race, and fair play to him. I mean, yeah, you can say what you want about gentleman drivers, but Ben Keating is certainly someone who's really honed his craft over the years, and the passion to do that. I can't imagine it's easy as an older gentleman either. Not that he's the oldest gentleman driver that we've seen, but you know what I mean. It can't be physically. It's tough doing a 24-hour race, even when we're doing it on iRacing, we're in the comfort of our own homes, let alone splitting it between 2 cars and 2 very physical cars as well. The LMP2, obviously a lot of downforce. You have places like the bus stop where you'll be really feeling the strain on your neck the next day, which will be while the race is still going on when you've got to hop in a GTD car.
Yeah, exactly. No time to relax. I suppose it's really is a testament to him. I think the thing I personally get from Ben when I watch interviews with him or any kind of pre-race build-up conversation with him is just how much he loves it. It's almost quite refreshing to see. I know he's been kicking around the paddocks now for a little while and definitely racing competitively for the last maybe 4 years. We've seen the Keating name around, but it's really nice to see how much he cares. He doesn't have that air of he's a gentleman driver with cash who's paying for a spot on the grid. That's something that a lot of people get aggravated about in Formula One, when actually it's the name of the game to some extent. But for gentleman drivers who have made their business elsewhere, coming and spending money, sometimes it can come across as a Sunday hobby for them. But to see Ben Keating absolutely loving motorsport, he loves Le Mans. He loves getting out there and being on track with different cars, different speeds, different challenges. It's almost like he is actually a young race driver trapped in this older man's body who's just blessed with a successful business that enabled him to do it. But I don't know, it's refreshing to see. And like you say, to see him go from a P2 car, which he absolutely spanked the field in those first couple of hours, to then hop into a GT3 Aston Martin, which of course he hasn't driven before, and be that quick still. He was competitive in it. KTF Sport were a bit further down the order, but I don't think we have enough superlatives really to load on to Ben about how he's doing.
Yeah, no, it is fantastic, and something I sort of wish we saw a bit more of. I understand Ben's in a fairly unique position, and he brings some great sponsors with him and all that sort of thing. So, you know, it is a case of, if you can do it, then why not? And I'm sure a lot of us would do the same thing in Ben's position. And like you say, it's sort of infectious when someone has that level of passion about something. It reminds you why you're watching along and staying up all night and sacrificing sleep to watch this thing, and let alone for those guys having to actually go out and do it. Obviously a massive privilege for them, but it is a huge commitment, and certainly not taking the easy route, and he hasn't been for the last few years. And it's great to see. I'm excited to see what he does next as well, because he's driven some really, really cool cars in the past. Probably the standout one for us is the Viper at Le Mans in 2015.
I was just going to say, I suppose if you put a Ben Keating Memorial Museum together or whatever, and if you just decided to get a garage together of the cars he's driven over the last 5 years, what a mix of shapes and sizes and speeds and liveries, I suppose, as well. He's more consistent with the wind's colours now, but how fantastic would that be? You'd have, like you say, Vipers in there, the Ford GT, you'd have a P2 Orica, you'd have a Merc AMG GT3 in there. I suppose now you've got the TF Sport Aston to add in there.
The Riley LMP2 car as well.
Riley LMP2 car, fantastic. Yeah, the WeatherTech coloured one.
Only time we've really ever seen that car race. Obviously, I know me and you make the Mazda comparison in DPI fairly often, but, you know, we've never really seen that. That car race apart from at Le Mans in 2017. One thing I did want to ask you, sorry to cut across you there, contact between the leading Mercedes and the AF Corsa Ferrari.
Yeah.
No further action on that incident. A fantastic battle up to that point. It was really, you know, tooth and nail between Mauro Engel and I think it was Matteo Cressoni in that car. Maybe that was just before he got in. But yeah, unfortunately, sort of came to a head at turn one, which is where the Ferrari had been challenging for most of the race, when I think Daniel Ellis was in the car at that point. Obviously, from our perspective, seemed like there wasn't really much either driver could do about it. It looked like a bit of an unfortunate incident. Do you think that was the right call, to have no further action?
For me, it's one of those that walks the line in, okay, so there's been an incident. How do you apportion blame to someone in that situation? You've got, if you wanted to, I suppose you would say, oh, it was the aggressor's fault. We always hear about, if you're the one going for the move on slower traffic, etc., you're the one who's got to be clean. In this situation, I suppose, could you say it's on the Ferrari to try and put a clean move off? After 20 hours of racing, then, you know, I don't think a clean move's really something that crosses the minds of drivers when they're going wheel to wheel like that. But I think it was the right call, massively. I back it being the right call, because if you were, like I was saying, to apportion blame onto the Ferrari, he's the one who came off worst. That car ended up in the barrier. That's the car that had already suffered the penalty of that incident. And then if you were to then apply a penalty to the Merc to try and level them out in some sort of overseeing justice, all in equal balancing opinion, then the Merc was not the aggressor in that situation, I don't think. And then that would have seen an unjust penalty. To me, a racing incident, the Ferrari's always going to be looking up the inside. The Merc's always going to close the door a bit in that situation. Have I got them the wrong way around? I feel like it was the Ferrari.
Yeah, the Ferrari was on the outside.
Ferrari was on the outside.
Instance.
Yeah, so scrap everything I've just said stands. The Ferrari was on the outside, and I suppose he closes the door to some extent. Yeah, he leaves a lane, but it's a very snugly fit AMG sized lane on the inside there. I don't think there's room for for the Merc to continue that move without there being contact. So yeah, I just think it's racing. I just think it's one of those. I think it's just, okay, yeah, the controversy comes in that it was a fight for the lead, and then that's the car that went on to win, and the AF Corsa car didn't really feature again in the race after that. I don't see what attributing blame to someone would have achieved at that point in the race.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that one. I think it was definitely a shame to see the Ferrari sort of suffer because of that. Yes, it had the spin into the barriers, but then obviously had the left rear puncher as well, which sort of added insult to injury. And yes, that Mercedes did go on to win the race, but they did seem to be keeping that Ferrari at bay for quite a lot of the stint. I think it was actually Daniel Serra who was in the car when they were battling in the previous couple of stints with Maro Engel. And then Cressoni got on board when he was battling with Ellis. It was almost unfortunate for both of them in a way, because the way, first of all, it shouldn't be underestimated how difficult turn one is. Not speaking from experience, because we've only ever driven it on the sim, but even there, it's very difficult. There. Yeah, it is. But you're coming off a banking, going into a corner which is fairly blind, goes on for a very long time, doesn't really have one apex point, and if it did have an apex, it's right up next to a tyre stack. And it's a very difficult corner to go through cleanly in clear air, let alone when you've got a Ferrari on your outside. So I think something had to give. They were battling for hours, those two cars, and doing the same move. Seemed like the Merc was very happy to hold the inside line and make the Ferrari go the long way round, sometimes more successfully than others. But it was very difficult in that they sort of had that, the front right of the Mercedes hit the rear left quarter panel of the Ferrari. That then unsettled the Mercedes. Then it got on the grass a little bit. And I think in some senses that was the saving grace for that car, in the fact that it was out of control. He was actually saving a slide when he hit the Ferrari, which was kind of caused by the Ferrari being there and having the contact in the first place. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, before we go on about it too much, it was a racing incident, and it would have been a shame to see the Mercedes get penalised unfairly. I think a lot of people would agree, and lose the win, because I think that would have cost them the win to the Sun Energy Merc. So the right decision in the end. Shall we go on to another class? We go on GTD. The airtime it deserves, I feel.
Yeah, I think we have. I think it's, just to round off a fantastic race as always from GTD. So, well, I suppose let's stick with the GTs. Let's go to GTLM. For me, I felt it was a deserved send-off for the class at the Rolex 24, the last Daytona appearance for these cars. And to see Corvette, who have been a mainstay of IMSA for however long now, doing well, was great to see. And especially if they're having to convert this C8R to another class in the next 12 months, great to see that car get a win in a big enduro like that. And I'm sure it wouldn't have been the last if that class had continued. But overall, another great race from GTLM, besides, well, that Porsche BMW instance. Let's just dive in straight to that. I mean, what is going on there? Bruno Spengler in the 25 BMW hitting the back of the WeatherTech Porsche 911 RSR 19, at the start. An incident more akin to iRacing or Forza lobbies than to the Premier GT division in international racing.
Yeah, for a class which is famed for its wheel-to-wheel battling for over 24 hours, to have an incident like that before the green flag was, maybe embarrassing is a bit of a stretch, but certainly very disappointing, and not just for the cars involved. I know Kevin Estre was understandably very frustrated by the incident, and it caused a lot of damage to the WeatherTech Porsche. And in some senses, if you wanted an incident like that to happen in any class, which of course you don't want to see at any point in the race, let alone before the start of the race, it would have been, you would have said, please just don't take out the GTLM field, because they're low on numbers anyway, and we only have one Porsche. Yeah, we had two BMWs, two Corvettes, but some of the singular cars, it's like when the Risi car had the incident at the bus stop, we thought, oh, that's it, Ferrari's challenge is now done. And I guess that's the risk that you have in being a privateer in a sense, and only having one bullet in the gun in that sense. But it was a shame to see, and it did obviously put the WeatherTech car many laps down. I think it's just a case of that someone like Spengler is experienced enough to know now that the race will not be decided in the first 20 hours, let alone on the first lap of the race, let alone the first lap of the race. So it was a bit disappointing to see, and the damage it did to the Porsche was significant. It became quite apparent very quickly that it wasn't just going to be they've lost a bit of rear downforce. It was getting worse and worse and worse. And I can't imagine they ever really sort of found the balance of the car that they'd set up and spent a while setting up after that incident.
It was quite a lengthy time in pit lane. It seemed. I mean, they were almost around 12, 13 laps down.
I think it dropped to 14 at its peak.
I mean, you don't lose that time unless there's. We've been fascinated by this recent generation of Porsche race cars, how it will get biffed at some point by P2 coming past, or have a little knock on the barrier somewhere. Thing will pop into pit lane, and a guy will unclip the bodywork like it was barely attached in the first place and pop something back on. And a car that 5 minutes ago looked like it was limping home is almost brand new. I was quite shocked to see this car spend so much time in pit lane, but I think that was maybe just the extent of the damage went beyond what we saw. And like you say, I should expect better from Spengler, especially with his experience now, and in endurance racing, especially like you say, before the green flag. To take out a sixth of the field before the green flag is just quite ludicrous. If you said that in any class, you'd be a bit shocked, let alone with the small numbers we have in GTLM. I suppose a question then is, was the C8 untouchable? Did you think the Corvette was, obviously it was the class of the field, but was it too easy for Corvette? They seem to have the edge on BMW in every situation. The Rizzi Ferrari looked at some points the only challenger before they had issues. Is it too easy for the C8 to win in GTLM?
Just to round off quickly, before I go into that, just to say, Tim and I are not apportioning blame and saying that Spengler would do that deliberately. Of course, he wouldn't jeopardise that. I fully understand it would have been a misunderstanding. I think Estra was expecting the leaders to go, and they had hit the brakes and then was waiting to go. Sort of, it's very difficult in that situation where you're sort of like, do I, don't I? I could end up getting a great start, or there could be contact. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. Equally, you should be holding enough in reserve at that point to not have contact with another car around you. Just to clarify, that wasn't us saying, oh, what an idiot, why is he deliberately hitting a car? Because that's not the case. But it was just a shame to see that.
And to finish off that point, I actually remarked during the race how stop-starty these restarts, and especially the race start for the Raw. I mean, how that didn't kick off in DPI was pretty incredible. And the race start at Rolex 24 at the front of the grid was very that kind of lunging of, oh, I'm going, no, I'm not, I'm going, no, I'm not. I'm not surprised if that just ricocheted back down the field, to be honest. So a very strange one, especially considering the talents involved. But back to the point, C8R, that's just the car to have and the car to beat in GTLM racing at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think in previous years we've seen quite distinct strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, the BMW's been quite notorious for being very quick in a straight line, and that's something that Corvette, especially when they had the C7R, were sort of saying, we can race them on the infield, but we really can't on the banking. And you could see that the BMW drivers didn't have that advantage this year, whether it was the BOP applied to it. I know we discussed that they had some extra weight added.
20 kilos, 20 kilos after the Raw quali race is a lot extra weight to carry around.
Yeah, it definitely isn't to be, sniffed at, that added weight. But also you'd think that would affect them a bit more on the infield sections, whereas it seemed to be actually the BMW could live with the Corvette, especially in the sort of last hours of the race, when the Corvette would get track position. I don't know whether that was just Corvette drivers taking it easy, conserving the brakes and trying to, stroke it home and sort of do the Jason Plato of win the race in the least amount of time kind of thing. But we definitely didn't see the advantage on the banking that we've seen for the last few years with the BMW. And in that sense, Corvette did make it look kind of easy. It was only, you did get the impression that it was going to have to take something going wrong, like we saw for Nicky Katzberg in the pit lane, for them to really be sort of taken out of the fight. And even when that did happen, it was kind of just like, okay, it's a matter of time before that car comes back through, because they've been the class of the field. And that C8R has just sort of picked up where it left off last season. I know this is its first major endurance victory, but it's hardly surprising to see it at the front. But still, that we had a great battle in GTLM considering the numbers, and it almost proved that we don't need a huge field of, double digits in GTLM to produce great racing. But that's not to say that IMSA haven't made the right decision in being sort of proactive and making GTD Pro a thing.
So I think to me it was just a classic GTLM race. You clearly had some cars that were working better, and it was up to some others to see if they could get in amongst it and disrupt the program. I think, like you say, it was going to take something. BMW seemed to be there when there was a caution, and they would bunch back up again. And we had a lot of cautions over this weekend. There seemed to be a lot more than before, but they were then there, and it was like, oh, can the Beamer get in and disrupt the process? Can the Beamer get in amongst the Corvettes that seemed to be quite happy to just take turns at the front? I was impressed though by just the level of pace from those guys though. It didn't seem, I know we've come to know and love that from GTLM, but like you say, in a smaller field, when gaps started to open up, there was no, okay, let's just hit a number and go round. It was heavy hitting all night and all through the morning. Even when there was a half a minute, 40-second buffer onto the BMW after pit stops, there was no, let's just see if we can make the end now. Let's just cruise around and deal with traffic. We saw in the morning, everything came back together when the number 24 BMW suddenly decided it wanted to party. I was just again amazed at these cars going so quick for so long with seemingly no issues besides a silly biff at the start.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze us, does it really, GTLM? And that's always been the case. Yes, we've seen the golden era of the class in terms of entries and diversity. Certainly, we're past that now, unfortunately, and it is, in its last season.
So
as
much
let's as we don't really want to talk about that being a thing, it is.
I think let's commit to talking about it. Let's chat about the end of GTLM there. So last Rolex 24 for that class, a nice send off. GTD Pro, initial thoughts, brief. If you can give me a bullet point, what you think about GTD Pro.
First of all, happy it's happened. I think it had to happen, and I'm glad that it's happened now, as opposed to going through the season with 3 cars as we're meant to have for the shorter races. And if you're in a class which is guaranteed a podium, regardless of whether you finish however many laps down, it is a bit frustrating as a fan to see that. And I think we all sort of were like, okay, phew, like they're doing the right thing here. Yes, it's unfortunate that GTLM has gone the way it has, but I think we'll always look back at it and be like, what a class that was. Yes, it sort of phased out at the end of its life, but if there's races like that in the Enduros this year, then we will always look back on it with fond memories. And we had at the end of GT1, quite often you'd see Corvette battling with itself, and everyone still looks back on the GT1 era with rose tinted goggles, don't they? So it's like, it's one of those things. I think it had to happen. I'm really excited for the future, seeing GTD Pro get a look in. And like we said, sort of, if you hadn't been watching GT3 endurance racing up until this point, then get used to the sort of action we've seen in GTLM, because that's what it's going to be like with the level of competition. And we will see a lot more diversity again and bigger grids, I'm sure. And hopefully, I know this is a completely separate topic, it puts a bit of pressure on the ACO, and we might end up seeing if not
Well,
the top GT class being GT3 at Le Mans, at least one of the classes being GT3. Hopefully, they can use that as a bit of a case study, and see how it goes down in
well,
IMSA, to sort of say, okay, maybe it's time that we give this a go.
it's a fantastic, like you say, a case study. And I think a point that stood out to me was towards the end of the race, Lawrence Vantor, who'd had to park the FAF Motorsports Porsche. He was on the phone to the guys in the Radio Le Mans booth, who again did a great job. But anyway, not to get sidetracked by the broadcast team once again, being amazing. He was saying that the point that really stood out to me, he said he was working towards a GTD Pro drive. That was straight up what his season is here with FAF. But what I was interested with, or most interested by, sorry, was his comment when he said, look, no one cares whether these cars are slower or faster. Yeah, it doesn't. I'm the one driving it. Us drivers, yeah, it's cool for us to be driving the fastest GT car in the world in GTLM. But for the people at home, for the people paying sponsorship money, for the broadcast, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I'm driving the fastest car in the world. I think that was a really hard-hitting point about how successful this new class could be. Because, okay, yeah, new fans are joining all the time. And like you say, we're going to look back on GTE, the GTLM days as, yeah, those are some of the greatest GT cars of our lifetimes, and indeed probably of all time. But we're going to be so engrossed in such epic racing. I'm confident in getting my crystal ball out and saying it is going to be, if it's a scratch on what we've had in GT and GTLM, and if it's a scratch on what we've seen in GT3 racing across the world, it will be brilliant. But it's that comment about we will move with the times. That's the way we're going. It doesn't matter if these cars are faster or slower. If the racing's good, we're going to watch it.
Yeah, and realistically, Vantor makes a great point. To the casual fan, there's really not that much of a difference in terms of lap times, in terms of aesthetics as well. I think GTLM became pretty radical. And you look back at the sort of GT2 cars that preceded, or sort of became the GTE class or GTLM class, were very simple in comparison. Then we had cars like the Ford GT come in, and very radical designs. Huge diffusers started to appear, and it forced Corvette and Porsche to throw their sort of rule book, which has been sort of etched into their sort of ethos for decades, and be like, right, we're going mid-engine because we need to do it to keep up, kind of thing. And that's not to say GT3 hasn't come a long way, because it definitely has. Yeah. I mean, GT3 steering wheels are no longer wheels. So It's one of those classes which has obviously come a huge way. The cars have pretty much doubled in price since this time a decade ago. So on the face of it, we're still going to see great racing. We're still going to have balance of performance, and we're still going to have top teams, and if not, fully manufacturer supported teams as close to, and top drivers, the drivers that we're used to seeing battle it out for 24 hours at the best races in the world. We'll still get to see that. So for the casual fan, not much has changed. And for the die-hard endurance racing fan, as much as you love GTLM or GTE, you have to sort of admit defeat at some point and say, look, this is, as much as I loved that era, and I will, continue to look back on that and rewatch old races of that, fair play. But you've got to move with the times and accept that this is the right decision that had to happen at some point.
I think me and you we're very pro GTD Pro in the sense of what it offers. But I feel from a business and financial perspective, it's just come at the right time now. It was almost, another season. I think it could have been too late, even just another year. For me, the standout of the Bentley Motorsport program being pretty much shut down, that's got no intentions of ever firing up in GT racing again until hydrogen technology rolls around. I mean, imagine if they left it another year and maybe other brands were thinking, okay, this isn't, we've done our time here now. Why carry on? It could have been absolutely disastrous. And then where does GT racing stand? To me, I'm very happy that we've got it in now and we've got this announcement made. And I think I was mentioning this to you before, it's going to take the load off this reduced GTLM sized class for this year. I think if we had had this constant question mark over what was going to happen with GTD, GTLM, GTD Pro, GTD Plus, it was called at one point in some articles, we would have been going, oh, come on, just hurry up, just do it, just kill off GTLM, like just get on with it. What a sour way to end off, to kill off a fantastic class when now it's almost a tribute tour, especially in North America. The question over how long it lasts in Europe is another thing, but to enjoy these cars go racing at Long Beach, Watkins Glen, Petit Le Mans and Sebring, and be like, okay, this is the last time you get to enjoy these cars here. It's got a completely different air about it to if we were still waiting for this decision. To touch on quickly your point about this case study thing, I mean, GTM is booming. There's a market there that we've seen properly explode in the last 5 years, really. It's customer racing's always been where it's at, it seems, in endurance racing, particularly in sports cars, but this is a format that is really succeeding. The question mark now is how long do they let that continue if GTD Pro does well in the States?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a headache because the GTLM and GTD Pro decision makes so much sense because of the reduced grids, whereas we are still seeing established GTM teams committing to their futures and up and coming GTM teams purchasing new, in inverted commas, cars and looking to go racing. Is that because they just want the opportunity to race at Le Mans? A lot of them probably. And would that still be the case if they're GT3 cars? Almost definitely. I mean, we'd have such an oversubscribed GT3 class if that did happen. But yeah, it is a slight headache, I guess, for the ACO, especially when GT Pro numbers for at least the full season WEC aren't looking very strong at all. I don't know. Is it something that will then sort of fizzle out in the same way that GTE Pro, the Pro classes, GTLM have done? We'll have to wait and see. But it is one of those things where it's like, it's almost a little bit frustrating because if GT3 Pro does work, GTD Pro I should say, and the GT3 format does become okay, this could be here to stay, and this is the rightful replacement to, GTLM is dead, long live GT3. I think I saw Jamie Price tweeting. What's your opinion on it? I'm quite interested to hear that because, like you say, I mean, I've just described it as a headache, so I've given it a bit of a non-answer.
I do think it is an issue, but I think it's doing so well that I don't think they'll have to come up with a solution for the next. I think there's 2 seasons in GTM.
Yeah.
And I think even if they scrapped GTE Pro and had a Pro GT3 class at Le Mans and still had the GTM, so the ALMS, ELMS. Did I say ELMS twice? I think I did. But anyway, all those people are kept happy by having a class to run their cars in, which they've bought. It's not like these are cars that they just miraculously have and can turn up and drive. This is money being invested. Proton Competition buying another RSR 19 or another few or however many they bought. It seems like they've got them falling out of their ears. I think there's another season minimum in GTM before they've really got to start thinking about it. And that's just because I think it's actually in a really good space at the moment. It's just GT Pro, GTLM, where it's manufacturers, where it's, at the end of the day, someone's got to count up the numbers for Porsche, Aston Martin, BMW's expenditure, and if the numbers aren't good enough, something's got to go. And typically, it's racing programs are the first to suffer. But yeah, I think your headache comparisons not incorrect, but I think it could be a headache
a headache for the future.
A headache for the future. Yeah, they're keeping it numbed with a healthy dose of painkillers at the moment in GTM. But I'd like to add, this is my final note really on that, is that with LMDH hypercar around the corner, with Audi, Porsche, Acura, Honda, whatever they're going to be called. Well, it'd be Acura, but who knows what might happen in terms of an international program. How fantastic would it be to see Audi, say, or any of these brands presented with an opportunity to win overall with a prototype that's obviously an Audi or obviously a Porsche or obviously whatever brand decides to do that, but also have enough money to send a factory GT3 program to also fight for a class win and do a clean sweep at Le Mans. I mean, that's just got PR.
That does. You can already see the headlines, can't you? Audi take clean sweep at Le Mans or something like that. It would be absolutely huge. And I've seen some arguments saying that why would manufacturers do that? It makes no sense. But then you look at Porsche when they returned to LMP1 in sort of 2014, 2015, they came back to GTE Pro in 2013. So they'd already committed to that GTE program, albeit GTE was still pretty young at that point. And they thought it made sense to commit to both classes still, obviously having the factory team run by Manthey. That's not to say we wouldn't see the same thing happen there again if they turned up with LMDH cars. There is also the point that if the ACO are willing to let LMDH and hypercar run side by side, then maybe it isn't too much of a culture shock since they've done that and that's been racing for a couple of seasons to then say, okay, it makes sense because we've got GT3 cars racing in GTD Pro, just as we had GTLM cars racing in North America, and then the Corvettes could come over, the Fords could come over, the Vipers could come over, throwback, albeit with different BOP, of course. But yeah, it's an interesting one for the future, and probably one that we've said enough about for now. Shall we move on to the top class and the overall winners?
Yeah, you're doing a great job of pushing me on. The GTD Pro whole, as we shall determine it for conversation, is a deep one.
It needs a separate podcast episode.
Yeah, it does. Well, maybe that's
the slow lap podcast.
Yeah, the very slow but professional backed.
The parade lap.
The factory backed in lap. So actually, if you would like to see that, then do add some sort of comment to whatever platform you're listening to this
and
on.
We'll know you're a proper fan because you've listened this far. So well done to you.
If you made it this far, let's do a test. If you made it this far, write the word. What should we say? What's a good name? Oh, David Hannemeyer Hansen. If you can comment David Hannemeyer Hansen, if you've made it this far, then we'll know who the real stands are. But anyway,
nice.
Top class. Do you like that one? That was a good name to pick as well.
It was, yeah.
Probably got to look up the spelling. I miss having
that name. I do miss having DHH on the timing screens, and especially on the rolling ticker because it took up so much space on there, which we should add was brilliant having on the coverage. And WEC, if you're listening, when you're listening, you need to bring that back because we all love it, and we all have our own moments where we all think, oh, I need to actually keep tabs of what's going on in this class. I'm going to wait until it swings around on the rolling ticker. Or if you're as nerdy as Tim and I, you will deliberately spend your time at some points throughout the race trying to test your knowledge if you can get every single driver along the rolling ticker.
Yeah. But it's part of the fun, isn't it? The ticker is an endurance racing institution in its own right. And the lack of it in WEC is appalling and not something I stand for. I mean, we had it. It was always there, and it's always so fun to watch. And it's great because if you get to that point in the night and it's 3 a.m. and the commentators are going off about what kind of petrol they sniffed when they were 14, you can keep tabs on the race. Like you're probably watching Eurosport coverage if that's happening, but you can keep tabs on your race on your own doing. And I was so happy. A lot of people following the new the Racing Blog Twitter account, by the way, at the Racing Blog _ if you're not following. A lot of people backed that, and I was quite proud to see so many like-minded people enjoying the fact that the ticker is missing from
It does sound
WEC.
like quite a trivial point, but is one, as you can probably tell, we are very passionate about. So bring that back. But we're
Yeah.
also passionate about DPI, aren't we, Tim?
The overall battle, yes, I am passionate about DPI. Again, I feel like I've said this with GTD, GTLM. Again, DPI giving us the race we've come to know and love from this class. I was absolutely loving the overall battle with the 01 Chip Ganassi car, and I was loving seeing the Acuras in non-Penske hands with better liveries and with stunning driver lineups as always. But once again, it's Wayne Taylor. It's a number 10. It's a black and blue car that finds itself at the front come the checkered flag. I mean, those guys have a love affair with this race that seems to be showing no signs of stopping. Again, what a fantastic battle. I mean, even if you didn't have all the other cars on track that were providing us a great race and you just had a DPI 24 hours, I don't think we would complain. It was a great battle.
Yeah, it was incredible, wasn't it? And obviously, even more of a fairy tale with Jordan Taylor bringing the Corvette home as well. So it's, I mean, what a sort of family to be involved in endurance racing. I mean, the Taylors have it good. I know we were joking about the driveway that Jordan Taylor always shows those GoPro karting vids on, and I am potentially more jealous of that than his Corvette drive, rightly or wrongly. But yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. A shame in some senses, obviously, to see the 01 car have the repeat punches that caused the caution, and then they fought back so well. And a real shame for the 31 as well. That was doing really, really well before the gear selection issue where they were stuck in third or fourth gear. And obviously, being quite avid Mike Conway fans, as we both are,
Yeah.
we need that guy to catch a break at some point because he's just too good not to have at least one sort of major endurance race under his belt.
The thing that amazes me is he's never in a car where he has to pull the weight himself. I mean, he typically does. And he typically does do a great job of making himself the star in the car. But to be with Felipe Nasser and Pippo Durrani, who are two of the most epic young sports car drivers in IMSA, to be with those guys and to not be able to catch a break is seemingly impossible. I mean, you'd have to pick every single lottery number incorrect to not win a race with those guys. I suppose a question comes in with that 31 car. What did you make of the addition of Chase Elliott, the 2020 NASCAR champion? I know there was a lot on social media and Twitter about NBC giving nothing but coverage for Chase Elliott, but I felt like it almost added this pro-am element to DPI that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I know you're keen to talk about this, especially when Chase was having his first stint in the car. We were remarking on it quite a lot. But you're right, it did add this sort of, okay, they've got, like we saw with the 48 car, having Jimmy Johnson in at the start and falling back a little bit. It was a similar story with Chase Elliott. And look, this can't be underestimated how difficult it must be to jump in and compete with the top drivers. And I'm sure that showed up that there was a deficit more because of the caliber of drivers they were up against. But you're right, it does add that element of like, okay, it's almost like having an AM start the car and you're expecting it to drop back and you want to use up their drive time because they're not, quite as consistent or they're not as confident in traffic. I know we saw Chase, I think, do sort of a half stint at one point. And it did feel a bit like, I completely get the fact that it's a daunting task. I didn't obviously have the NBC coverage on, had Radio Le Mans on, of course, IMSA Radio. And there wasn't so much of that. Jeremy Shaw said he was doing a good job for the task he's been dealt and the experience he has. I don't like drivers getting the limelight where they really perhaps haven't done something which has put them above the other drivers. I completely get the fact that drivers deserve a shout out, and if they could give airtime to each and every one, I'm sure they would. It's the same thing we saw with Fernando Alonso when he was in the number 10 car. We've said it before and we'll say it again. That's one of those things where it's like, yes, but these other guys are also amazing and they've done amazing jobs for longer than you can like shake a finger at, and they don't get the credit they deserve. And I know Alonso is always going to draw that tension and always going to be a standout driver in that sense. And I'm not saying he didn't do a good job, because especially at the Rolex 24, he did put in some amazing drives. Going off on a tangent here, I know, but it is still a point about drivers who aren't the full-time sort of endurance sports car. You know, they're not a Felipe Albuquerque. They're not a Mike Rockenfeller, for instance. They're these guys which are, you know, and they do deserve to have some coverage. But, you know, I don't feel like a lot of the drivers get the credit they deserve in comparison, which is frustrating. What do you think, Tim?
Well, is that a symptom of sports car racing, and probably has been for all of time, that these drivers don't get enough credit? Because, get ready for the segue here, a driver that has never, in my opinion, got the credit he deserves, but needs to get it loaded in after this race. Actually, there's two now, I've said that out loud, both in the same car, both in the 01. One of them being debutant Kevin Magnussen, who, to me, more than proved his value as a driver, more than proved what talent he actually has. I tweeted before the race, there was a video of him chatting. He looked like he was loving it. The way he was speaking about being in the car, how it felt, the sound of it. You know, he was picking up the little things, the things that don't really matter. He wasn't talking about whether he was quick or whether his lap times were good. He was talking about he liked how the revs kept climbing. You know, it's someone who's spent his life trying to get to Formula One to find so much pleasure elsewhere. It's fantastic. And what a performance from him. I mean, you can't discredit Magnussen. A three-driver team, he's going to have to lift and pull his own weight. And he did more, on multiple occasions. He was the quick guy in that car. He was the quick car out on track. You know, I think that 01 car really had the win almost. You know, if you were to look at the first half of the race, you'd go, okay, well, the 01's gonna take it. No matter what happens, that car seemed to be in the fight, making something happen. If it lost the lead because of a caution or it lost the lead in pit stops, it seemed to just have the pace. And in that, before you pass a comment on Kevin Magnussen, going to just quickly add, Renger van der Zande, once again, put that man in a Cadillac and he knows how to wheel it beyond, I think, any data or graph that has been produced by an engineer. He seems to find something different. Another driver that hopefully got a healthy share of the spotlight over the weekend, just being rapid.
Yeah, put him in any car, to be honest, Van der Zande, and you're always gonna have exciting racing and great pace. But watching his stint at the Spa 24 Hours last year, and he really made that NSX climb up the order. He is a fantastic driver, and it's great. It was great to see him in the car at the end, because they could have easily put in Magnussen and gone for the sort of headlines of Magnussen bringing it home for the win kind of thing. But Van der Zande was the guy pulling the really, really brave moves around the outside at turn one, and just seemed to have the pace. I mean, he managed to get past Kobayashi, despite Kobayashi sort of putting him on the grass a little bit.
No easy feat, is it?
Stint.
Passing a Le Mans lap record holder and WEC champion, and arguably one of the best sports car drivers of the contemporary era. Try passing that guy. It's not going to be something that's not going to roll over, is he, Kobayashi?
No, so I think the 01 was the car which sort of had, the most formidable driver lineup. You can never discount Scott Dixon. His record in endurance racing is amazing, let alone at the Rolex 24, especially with Chip Ganassi. That was always the combo, which was pretty lethal, sort of 5-6 years ago. But yeah, moving on to K-Mag. I mean, like you said, it was brilliant to see him sort of smiling from ear to ear in interviews. In many senses, just taking after his old man. The Formula One thing didn't really work out as planned.
It's overrated.
Lots of potential. Never really. Yeah, we'll move on to that at some point, I'm sure. Maybe not this episode, I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, yeah, fantastic pace. great battle he had with the leading number 10 car, where they had the sort of switcheroo at the bus stop where Magnussen drove it in really deep and then lost it on the exit. That was just great racing and fantastic to hear from him, just really enjoying himself. And I don't think it can be underestimated, the mentality shift. If you give a racing driver a sniff at a win, I mean, their complete outlook on things just changes massively. And then they get to enjoy the little things like the sound of the car, driving through traffic, all these things which are quite new and could easily be quite daunting to a rookie at the Rolex 24, which became little things that K-Mag was absolutely relishing.
I mean, you wouldn't, if you were to take the facts and say, oh, a rookie in the DPI class is going to send it around the outside of someone at the bus stop, you'd be like, oh, right, that's going to end in a crash then, or that's someone who doesn't quite know what he's dealing with, or, you know, whatever. But K-Mag just seemed to be lapping it up every second. He seemed to be, not only was he quick, he was consistent, he was controlled. When there were cautions, he got his head back down. And like you say, the mindset of going, okay, you know, forget about that series where it's an uphill battle for anyone, and welcome to the level playing field. If you've got the talent, you'll win. On the talent side of things, we haven't really shone the light enough on the eventual race winners. I mean, what is there to say about Wayne Taylor Racing, a team that just seem to, they're always there at the Daytona 24, and they're always there throughout the IMSA season with a new car this year, obviously the Acura RX-05, the driver lineup, I mean, tried, tested and proven. But with the addition of Felipe Albuquerque this season, which has got to be, in my opinion, one of the signings of the off-season.
Yeah.
I mean, and what a proven talent he is already in LMP2. But to take on the overall fight in IMSA, in IMSA for the first time like that, really showed just how much of a talent this Portuguese driver really is.
Yeah, that was fantastic to be able to see him getting some of the limelight. I know we do talk about, and we have just spoken about sports car drivers not getting the credit they deserve. I guess that's kind of part and parcel of sharing a car. Car doesn't come to the end of the 24-hour race having just had one driver driving it throughout, which is, I guess, kind of why we don't see the same level of, you know, fanboying over one driver's performances, unless you really look into the details and that sort of thing. But honestly, we've always rated Felipe. He's, first of all, a great guy, really nice character, always smiling, always has the sort of attitude of look, if something happens out on track, it's racing. Let's, you know, we'll resolve it with another battle out on track kind of thing. Not one of those guys to hold grudges. And DPI did really get quite nasty at some points last season. So it's nice to see a sort of nice guy coming first kind of thing. And yeah, the whole DPI battle was brilliant throughout. It wasn't just great in the last sort of hour or so. It was throughout, like many of the classes, aside from LMP3, you'd have to say, throughout there was just seconds separating the leaders. You always kept guessing as to who was going to get track position, be it through a caution or just through how the stints were playing out. And brilliant. And for me, I'm going to introduce a section of the podcast here, which we'll probably always end up doing after these sort of things. What was, I guess, without saying Spirit of the Race award, what was the car which stood out to you? Because I definitely have one in mind.
I think I know who your one is, so I'm tempted to kind of try and find someone else. To me,
who do you think my one is?
Well, I'm confident in saying that your one is the 55 Mazda, because
called out, absolutely called out.
But yeah, before we touch on that, but I think for me, if I was to say like a Spirit of the Race thing, I really liked the effort from the Settler guys to just, that car was beaten up and the gearbox broke, and it's no quick fix, especially when a car's hot and already, you know, done however many hours of lappery. For them, with a car that's not going to make another appearance, that's the last time they're racing it, for them to put in the graft to change the gearbox, to sort out whatever issues were going on, put it back out on track and do some more laps, I don't think you can really take anything away from those guys. The result doesn't matter. It was the getting the car to the finish line. But yeah, go on. Let me just let you take the floor on the Mazda. What a
Well,
race.
it's the same kind of thing. It's what the endurance racing ethos is all about, isn't it? Just carrying on regardless of what gets thrown your way. The Mazda was meant to line up on the front row of the grid. Unfortunately, had the issue on the warm-up lap, dropping them right down the order. So we didn't really see them feature in the fight until very late on. And then when they'd finally got back up onto the lead lap and with the leaders on track even, then they get hit with another issue in the night, and then they're a few laps down. And luckily, the nature of Rolex 24 is you can get laps back with cautions and all that sort of thing. And that's not to underplay their achievement, because when they were out on track, they really seemed to step it up a notch in terms of pace in the last couple of stints, especially when they were battling for the lead with the number 10. It didn't really seem like they ever really had that pace until that point in the race. But I just thought that was brilliant. And obviously, them being down to one car this year, it was a bit of an outside bet for a podium, let alone a win. So when that kind of looked on the cards, I think everyone got really excited by that. And just, yeah, fantastic driving. I think Ollie Jarvis is another driver who goes under the radar quite a lot, let alone someone like Harry Tinknell, let alone someone like Balmerito, who's just, a bit of a mainstay in that car now, and just someone who is going to get the job done, but also someone who's tremendously passionate about endurance racing and the job that they do. So I thought that was brilliant. I really enjoyed seeing that car come back. And of course, just to see a bit of diversity, having 3 different cars in the top 3 in DPI, I think is a great thing, when for the majority of the race, it looked like, okay, it's going to be which Cadillac's going to win this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which has been the case in a lot of the enduros that we've sort of seen over the last few years.
I think it was like to echo your comments. It was great to see the Mazda there at the end, and a shame not to see them be able to take the flag and to actually start their race properly. I would go out on a limb and say I don't think that car had the pace to win over the 24 hours anyway. I do think that it was always going to come down to the 10 and the 01. I think those were just going to be the 2 cars to beat. All pro lineups, if you like. They haven't got a NASCAR ballast added to their driver lineup, but they were fundamentally the fastest cars. I don't think we would have seen. Obviously, it would have been great to see the Mazda in there fighting, trying to cause a problem, maybe getting ahead on a caution in the pit lane, rolling the dice with strategy. So in some cases, maybe their pace was hidden by the fact they were recovery driving from 24 and a quarter hours. But I fundamentally don't think that car had the pace to win again at a Rolex 24. It just seems luck never seems to go their way at the big race. But who knows? Is a Mazda becoming the Liverpool? Well, you can't really make that joke anymore. But the Liverpool of IMSA, where it'll be next year, maybe next year we'll get it. I mean, what's it going to take? They've got the drivers. The car's now proven the RT24P is a race winner and a race dominator. I mean, the summer of Mazda 2019, where they just seem to win everything.
Yeah.
Is it just luck? Is it just they've run out of luck, or they don't seem to take their luck with them when they go to Daytona?
Yeah, I was also going to make a bit of a football comparison in saying that if the Mazda had won, it would have been a bit like a sort of sour late goal, or maybe a late penalty to sort of win the race. Not a racing penalty, of course. We're still on the football analogy here, folks. But, I don't think it had the pace to do it. But that sort of made the podium all the sweeter, because they sort of fought through the issues. I don't think they had the pace they thought they were going to have going into it. I don't think they did really too much running across the practice sessions in the build-up. I think they really felt like, okay, we're set up now for the race. Didn't really do too much running in warm-up and that sort of thing. They didn't feel like, we're still finding stuff. They felt like the car was pretty dialed in, which then I think surprised them a fair chunk when the race wasn't really going their way. Yes, they had issues, but like you said, on track, they didn't seem to be the car that you'd have put your money on if the sort of 10 and the 01, the 48 maybe, the 60 and the 55 had been all competing for the top 5. You would probably say the Mazda's going to come in 5th out of that lot, based on what we'd seen. Obviously, we know it's a great car. We know it's got great drivers, but on this occasion, unfortunately, when it had things, it was able to fight back from issues that haven't happened in the past. We've seen them leading quite convincingly and have fires and unreliability and issues that have forced them to go behind the wall. Ironically, the one time they actually have a shot and they're in position to do it, the car isn't quite as on the pace. So yeah, I do agree fundamentally. I don't think they would have had the outright pace to do it. But I think that adds to the endurance racing kind of thing of never give up and see where we end up. So to get a podium for those guys probably did feel like, maybe not feel like a win, but probably felt like, okay, that's we've maximised the result there.
Question. This is the final question, the final topic we'll discuss here on this.
Collective sigh of relief from whoever's made it this far right now.
Yeah, they deserve a well-earned break after listening this far. I mean, maybe they haven't been paying attention and they've just got it in the background to provide some sort of horrendous background noise this must be, but unlucky. I suppose you've just tuned in to what you're actually listening to, because now we're almost speaking directly to you. But final question to discuss, and you can give a one-word answer if you want. Would Renke van der Zande have made it past? Would he have made the move for the lead on the 10 in the final 10 minutes? Would he have actually got past?
No. That's my one-word answer. Unless there's a caveat to that. There's an
asterisk.
It's a no with an asterisk. Yeah. Okay. See the bottom of the page right now. It reads, unless traffic got involved, because we did see that happen at a point where the 10 caught a lot of GTLM traffic. I think it was the Risi car and the Corvette duo just before the Risi car to make its final stop. And I think the 10 really backed out of it to try and not
they were going into the bus stop, isn't it? It was going into the bus stop, and Albuquerque, his car had taken the left side tyres only, hadn't they? So he had improved rubber on that left side through the bus stop where you're leaning on the left, that he was particularly cautious through there, or didn't have the same pace that the rubber all-round gifted Van der Zande did in that final 10 minutes. But he did seem really cautious, and like you say, caught that GTLM traffic. It was like he had just hit the pit lane speed limit, so he looked so slow in comparison to the storming caddy behind. But yeah, traffic continue. Sorry.
Yeah. Up to that point, it had sort of been chipping away. It was quite big chunks, but it had to be quite big chunks because we're in the last sort of half hour, 20 minutes of the race. It was sort of 6-7 tenths in this lap, 4 tenths in the first sector, another 7 in the final sector, matching each other through the infield kind of thing. And then once the traffic came, it was like, okay, now this is on. This is wheel-to-wheel fighting. And it did seem like Van der Zande was going to do it. It was just a matter of time. And then it sort of fizzled out a little bit. And it seemed like Albuquerque had figured out where to place the Acura. He knew the strengths that the Van der Zande had at that point and sort of broke the rhythm a little bit, sort of interrupted his charge. And I don't think, given the distance that the Acura is able to sort of pull out of the acceleration zones, if you like. I know the bus stop's still very high speed, but sort of the torque and sort of instant acceleration he had, being a turbocharged car versus a naturally aspirated Cadillac, I think that really helped him just to build enough of a buffer so that when Van der Zande started coming back at him, he actually had enough real estate between the two to just be like, okay, this isn't going to be wheel to wheel this lap. We'll have to see next lap. And obviously the 48 was pushing very hard. I mean, that car was dancing through the bus stop. And we know that it had the potential weak spot in terms of setup and overstressing the right rear tyre, because that happened twice in the end. So they were clearly having to push very hard to keep in the lead battle. It would have been tight with traffic, because there would have definitely been at some point the leader having to catch more traffic, and having to be the first car to deal with those groups of traffic is always going to lose you time. But based on the evidence we saw, I don't think
the jury have decided. The jury have come to a decision.
That's my one-word answer, folks. Yeah. Very, very short and concise.
Yeah, fantastic.
What's your one-word answer?
My one word is yes. Actually,
ooh,
I do think he would have got past. Whether he would have stayed there. So my yes also comes with an asterisk on it.
Oh, so a yes across the line, and then. Yes, then sort of getting outbroken again in T1.
he leads around through the tri-oval and then just loses the lead through T1. Nice. Exactly. But I think that if with the traffic, with an opportunity, I mean, we did see an opportunity and they were side by side through the kink on the infield, and Albuquerque was able to do enough. And yeah, whilst I agree with your point about broken rhythm and, you know, with the rubber disadvantage that Albuquerque had, he was able to work out what was going on with that caddy behind. I just think that given a second opportunity, a second bite of the cherry, a second chance to win, I don't think Renger van der Zande would have let it go his way. Could we have seen a bit of wheel banging? Almost certainly. I think he could have. I do think he would have made it past. I don't think he would have kept it for too long if Albuquerque had any chance of denying him the win. But yeah, well, what a nice point to end it off on. Hey, an agree to disagree on
that's how you do it, folks. Anyone who's got an account on Twitter, that's how you have a debate, by the way. You listen to what the other person is saying and you don't call them rude names.
Oh, you can listen
with you.
You can listen. I didn't realise you could.
It's not a feature they've added into Twitter yet, I don't think.
Are they trialling it with select accounts only?
No, I think they're going to bring in a dislike button first because that takes priority.
TRB is going down then on Twitter. Dislike button. Anyway, well, so thanks, Mike, anyway, for joining me on the first of hopefully many in-lap podcasts.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed that. Hopefully we'll have a lot more great races like the Rolex 24 to discuss this season. Definitely, and I'm sure for those who have made it this far, congratulations. You've earned yourself a cup of tea or whatever beverage tickles your fancy. Be sure to hit the likes and the comments and the subscribes or follows or whatever it is, whatever platform you're on. Do one of those things, and we shall see you in the next episode, which should follow on from the Sebring 12 Hours in March. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. See you guys.